Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second Mondays with Mike and Joe virtual lunch and learn. I'm Nicole Wolfer with Providence Newberg Health Foundation. Our program will start momentarily. If you have questions during the program, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will be answering audience questions at the end of our program. And now I would like to introduce Doug Kane, who is the Executive Director of Providence Newberg Health Foundation.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Kane. I'm the Executive Director of the Providence Newberg Health Foundation. I want to welcome you to our second quarterly Mondays with Mike and Joe. As the Director of the Foundation, our purpose is connecting people to Providence to advance research, patient care, and wellness. We believe passion is at the heart of giving. Providence Newberg Health Foundation helps us move beyond ordinary patient care to profound excellence in all we do here at Providence. We strive to improve the lives of family and friends and contribute to the vitality of our community. Mondays with Mike and Joe is a quarterly virtual series focusing on the role Providence Newberg Medical Center plays in our community and how caregivers are working to improve health for all who live here. So let's get started. Now I'd like to welcome Mike Donahue, a man who spent over 40 years as news anchor at Coin 6 in Portland. Mike is also a current board member of the Providence Newberg Health Foundation. We are grateful for his service to Providence and our community. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Doug. I'm assuming people can hear me. I'm excited to be here again. And I'm also excited to learn what Providence Newberg is doing to alleviate what a lot of doctors and nurses are calling one of the biggest crises in American healthcare. I'm joined again this time, this is our second of these luncheons, by the CEO of Providence Newberg, Joe Yoder. And Joe, it's great to be with you. You've been in that job now for a little over a year. Are you feeling, it was a pretty steep learning curve at first. Are you feeling more comfortable?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, it's great to be here. Definitely things are getting a little more comfortable for me, but we still have a whole new set of challenges we're trying to face. It's not been without some impact to us, but I'm excited to hear from one of our stellar leaders today in our most impacted areas, our emergency department. So with that said, Mike, thanks again. It's great to be here talking to our virtual audience. We have a special guest with us today, Dr. Tom Johnson. Dr. Johnson is one of our emergency medical specialists here at Providence Newberg. He graduated from Stanford University Medical School in 2012. He's been here at Providence Newberg for 6 years. So I'd like to just say a big welcome to Dr. Johnson.
Hi there, Joe and Mike. Sorry, little technical issues. I'm definitely a better doctor than I am a computer programmer. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate getting the chance to talk to everybody in the community as well as you both about kind of how things are going here in our ED at Newberg.
I know emergency calls always spike during the summer with more people on the road and recreating, and you add to that this heat wave we've had, and then you add COVID. It's got to be a really busy place. I'm wondering, do you know how many average patients or how many patients you see on an average day?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, in general, recently we've been averaging anywhere between 70 to 80 per day. And historically, we were more in the 60s. Actually, during COVID, we had a relatively reasonable decrease down to sometimes even like the 40s per day. So we are actually right now experiencing higher volumes than we have ever here at Newberg. So it's been a challenge. But our staff has done a great job of kind of rising to the expectation and really doing an outstanding job of trying to keep up with just this massive influx of patients that not only we're seeing here at Newberg, but really throughout the greater Portland metropolitan area.
Dr. Johnson, I was wondering if we could understand a little bit more about your background and kind of who you are. Maybe could you walk us through your path to bringing you to our community here at Providence Newberg? And sort of what your role is and what you love about being here.
Absolutely. So, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the Portland area. Actually did my undergraduate studies at the University of Portland. So just, across the river. initially thought I wanted to go into research, and so ended up going down to Stanford, where I did a PhD in cancer biology. Decided that I kind of liked working more with people than mice, and so transitioned into a kind of medical school career. And initially thought maybe I'd be interested in oncology, but really had just a flavor for emergency medicine. So finished my medical school and always wanted to come back to the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I love this area, the proximity to the coast, proximity to the mountains, proximity to fishing, hiking, all the fun stuff that I love doing, that my family loves doing. And so ended up doing my residency at Oregon Health Sciences University. And then at the tail end of my residency, one of my mentors up there recommended that I just do a brief community rotation out at Providence Newberg. They said I'd love it. And so I spent 4 weeks here as a resident, and it was an amazing experience. The staff, the patients, the community, the consultants, providers, just a really cohesive unit. Really enjoyed my time here to the point where I was like, wow, I hope I could get a job here. And fortunately, there was an available opening. And so back in 2015, jumped on. And then over the last 6 years have been enjoying my time here. And over the last 6 months, took over the medical directorship of our emergency department group. Previously done by John Mitchell, who has left some amazingly large shoes for me to fill. He did a great job setting everything up. But my role as director is essentially not only to do some clinical shifts and kind of work out in the emergency department, but also help manage some of the more logistic aspects of things in terms of appropriate equipment, training, that sort of stuff.
Mhm. It is a great place to live. I would agree with you about that. I've read somewhere where 41% of a hospital's patients come through the emergency department. You're at the front door for the people that enter the hospital. It used to be a few years ago, before the pandemic, used to be people with chest pains, people with wounds. Those were the more typical patients. What kind of patients are you seeing today? What are some of the more maybe perhaps unusual ones we wouldn't think of?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very interesting, during kind of the height in that early part of the pandemic, back in, March of 2020, April of 2020, we pretty much saw people that either had COVID or similar COVID-like complaints, and that was it. Everybody was, I think, just petrified of going outside, and understandably so, because we really didn't have a good sense as to kind of how things were going. But recently, we have not seen a ton of, COVID. Luckily, we've got high vaccination rates in our community and in the state, which is great. So we've not seen a ton of COVID, but we've been seeing kind of the standard sort of, I fell and broke my ankle. I'm having a heart attack. I'm having chest pain, abdominal pain, appendicitis, strokes, sort of all of the usual things that you would expect an emergency department to see. We're kind of back to seeing a lot of that. And so there hasn't, interestingly, been a ton of change between now and before COVID. It was really just in kind of that, I should not say before COVID, because we're still in the middle of the pandemic, but kind of before we had the pandemic, and then kind of more recently, it's interesting. There's just been a kind of a general smattering of everything you would expect to see in an emergency department presenting here.
Dr. Johnson, one of the things that we have seen as an impact of this recent rise in volume has been wait times for emergency departments, both here and all around the state and really nationally. Can you talk a little bit about what we're doing locally to help improve on the wait times, and sort of, do you see this trend continuing into the future?
Yeah, Joe, it's a great question. And it is something that, as we discussed earlier, with those increasing volumes, it is getting harder and harder to, see the same number of patients that, we did before. To address the wait time issues, some of the things that we've started doing are, one, upstaffing our department. So we've definitely had times where we were kind of overstaffed compared to where we've been in the past with nursing. And we've had providers staying on late for certain shifts to really try to make sure that we can kind of cover as many patients as possible. We've also started starting workups in the waiting room. So unfortunately, there is now kind of more often than not, unfortunately, a chance to wait. But if you've come on with ankle pain because you rolled your ankle playing basketball, and unfortunately you're kind of stuck out in the waiting room, we're trying to initiate, hey, let's get that x-ray going. So that way, when you do get back, we already have all the information we need. We can kind of speed up the process. Or for example, if you come in with abdominal pain, we may have our lab techs come down, go ahead and draw some blood so we can get some appropriate studies to make sure your blood counts, your liver function, your kidney function are all okay. So that way, when you come back, we can either, discuss what we think is going on, or alternatively proceed with more advanced imaging that, had those tests not been done, would have added an additional hour and a half or so to the stay. So we're really trying to streamline as much as we can just the some of the sort of nuanced logistical things to really try to impact that wait time. But it is tough. In an ideal world, we'd have an emergency department that had 40 beds available, but unfortunately, that's just not a reality. And so we're trying to do as good as we can to try to minimize those waits. Because, speaking from personal experience, I'm sure everyone knows someone that has been in the emergency department, and waiting is not pleasant. I've been there with my kids. I've been there with my wife before, and it is not fun. And so we appreciate that. I apologize for it. I wish I could eliminate it, and we're trying to as much as possible.
Is there such a thing as an average wait time?
It's really interesting. And one of the most tricky things about emergency medicine is, unlike a physician's office where you kind of come in with this set plan, the ED can go from 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds. All it really takes is a couple of critically ill patients. They either need like intubation, or, if they're in cardiac arrest, that can just swamp a bunch of resources. And so if you, come in, for example, like after rolling your ankle with playing basketball, unfortunately, you may have to wait a little bit. So at times, we've had waits that unfortunately have been up to a couple of hours. At other times, you can just show up and we'll Zoom you right back. So I would say there is not an average wait time. It is so dependent on just what's actively going on right now in the department.
Some hospitals, larger cities, have been dealing with a problem called boarding. And you referred to it a little there. The idea of not having beds available in the hospital, the main hospital, patients in the emergency room who need those beds. And so that increases, obviously, the wait in the emergency department. We've even had a problem in larger cities where an ambulance will bring patients and there's no place to put them, so they have to go searching for another hospital that can take the patient. Do we see anything like that, Providence Newberg boarding or ambulance searching?
Yeah, and again, another great question. Unfortunately, just due to the kind of massive influx of patients that emergency departments within the city have been seeing, we are unfortunately having to board some medical patients in our emergency department. And it is something that, again, I think our staff in the hospital is trying to rise to the occasion as much as possible. But it is just an unfortunate reality of kind of the healthcare system, currently. In terms of ambulance diversion, that's also something that has become again, a bigger issue in the Portland metropolitan area, and I include Newberg in that group. Just as the emergency departments have become more crowded with more critically ill patients, sometimes it will be unsafe for a department to kind of take another ambulance. We try to minimize ambulance diversion here as much as possible because I think, for our community, it's great to keep people locally as much as we can. But, sometimes they just, for that patient safety, we will have to divert ambulances. But, once they show up at Newberg, they are absolutely our responsibility. And sometimes it may take a little bit to get a room. They may have to stay on the ambulance gurney for a little bit, but once they are here, we will absolutely take care of whoever comes through those doors.
Dr. Johnson, you mentioned with the waiting room or the potential waiting time, the volumes being up, there are different settings where people can receive care that might be perceived as an emergency. What advice, or maybe advice is the wrong word, but how can you help folks make a decision about, do I need to go to the emergency department? Should I go to an urgent care? Should I go to an express care? Is a telehealth visit with a primary care provider the best option? How can folks go about making that decision?
Yeah, and it's always, it's challenging because, sometimes, and one of the hardest parts about medicine is that there is a huge unknown. Sometimes chest pain can be a heart attack. Sometimes chest pain can be indigestion because, you had some, kind of a little too much spicy food the night before. But, the big things that I always say that, really mandate an emergency department visit would be if you're having pain in your chest. That is something that is absolutely, crucial to get that evaluated. If you feel short of breath, that's definitely something that you should, get checked out. If you pass out, and again, especially, if you pass out for, kind of unclear reasons, I would 100%, recommend getting that checked out. We want to make sure there are no findings that are concerning for like any type of heart arrhythmias. Sometimes, especially with this most recent heat wave, we had some people that were exceptionally dehydrated and really didn't realize it until they sort of, fell off the cliff per se, and, either syncopized or became actually kind of confused or delirious. So it's those are three really big things that I think are important. Serious injuries, like if you fall and you kind of land on your wrist and it's bending at a funny angle, that would be a reason to come to the emergency department, because oftentimes those kind of things will need actually like a sedation, so we can really kind of manipulate that wrist to get it back into place. But on the other hand, if you kind of, and again, going back to that basketball kind of analogy, if you roll your ankle playing basketball, you can walk on it, it's a little bit sore, and you think, boy, maybe I need an x-ray. That would absolutely be something that you could go to like an urgent care for, or even an express care. Providence has both express care and urgent care. The way I like to kind of differentiate those two is express care is sort of like a PCP visit. To some extent, they can accomplish some of the same things that you could at your primary care doctor, but can just get you in usually a little bit sooner. Whereas urgent care is kind of that next level to where, let's say you cut yourself with a knife while you're slicing a bagel. They can usually kind of repair some of those smaller lacerations. Now, for any complex lacerations or large lacerations, you oftentimes would be referred to the emergency department. So we can take a closer look and kind of get those repaired. Primary care, virtual health, also great. Those are really more for complaints that are, boy, my back's been bothering me. There wasn't like a specific injury, but it's just kind of sore. Or, maybe you've got a, kind of more of a chronic condition. You're worried that your blood pressure has kind of been creeping up. But telehealth can, be challenging for certain kind of acute conditions, because sometimes it is really important as a doctor to be able to actually lay hands on someone and say, boy, yeah, your ankle, it feels in a certain way that I think we need to do X, Y, or Z. So it's a challenging decision sometimes to make. And ultimately, if you decide to come to the emergency department, regardless of why you're coming here, again, we'll be happy to see you. We'll be happy to take care of you and deal with, the issue that you're coming in with.
And some emergency departments nationwide are reporting increases in mental health emergency. People who are considering suicide, people who are experiencing some kind of anxiety. Are you seeing more of those, and how do you deal with them? Does Providence Newberg have a program that deals with that?
Yes, and again, this is unfortunately a sort of increase that we're seeing nationwide. I think there are a variety of different reasons for it. I think the COVID pandemic has done no favors to anyone's stress levels, probably mine, yours included. So we have seen, unfortunately, an increased risk or an increased presence of people that have suicidal thoughts, sometimes suicidal attempts. Unfortunately, even in kids, especially teenagers, they've been so impacted by this pandemic. And so we've unfortunately seen a real increase in that. And then, we'll still see, people that are unfortunately having issues with psychosis. Sometimes people, will abuse drugs such as methamphetamine, and they will kind of present as if they're in a behavioral health crisis. And so, we do have resources at Newberg, and what we ultimately do is try to have them get, or I should say try, but we have them get screened by some of our mental health specialists who come in, and they'll, talk to the patient and try to figure out and determine, what is the best and most safest avenue to take care of this individual, because oftentimes we can arrange close follow-up in the community. The Providence Medical Group has an outstanding behavioral health team here at Newberg. I just cannot kind of sing their accolades more. Just a great group of dedicated individuals that make my life much easier, just because they are so willing to take care and take the lead on some of our patients that are having mental health crises. So sometimes if, we feel it's appropriate, we can absolutely kind of try to arrange close outpatient follow-up, either with, again, a Providence Medical Group, behavioral health specialists, or even the Yamhill County team. Yamhill County has a great mental health team as well. And so we try to, as much as we can, get people into an outpatient setting, but sometimes that's just not a possibility. And so then we'll have to hold someone in our emergency department until we can find an inpatient bed where they can receive psychiatric care. Again, whether or not it's for kind of a significant depressive episode resulting in some suicidal thoughts. Sometimes people have bipolar disorder, and so they're acutely manic, and they just really can't control their impulses. And so then they would need to, for their own safety, to kind of just be sort of kind of managed and monitored until things sort of calm down. So there are great resources for Newberg, and sometimes even if we don't have them in our hospital, we can reach out and use them elsewhere. And we've recently started a Tele Psychiatry program where actually psychiatrists will kind of beam in, very similar to this virtual visit that we're having, and chat with patients that we're holding in our emergency department to at least initiate some of that kind of therapeutic treatment, and to make sure that we're sort of heading in the correct direction.
This might be a question for Joe as well as Dr. Johnson, but Providence nurses have said that the solution to this particular crisis, if you want to call it that, is simple. That you need to hire more healthcare workers, and you need to retain the experienced ones that you have. Is Providence actively recruiting more staff to deal with emergency issues?
Yeah, I can jump in on this too, and then Dr. Johnson, please chime in. The short answer, Mike, is yes. We are actively recruiting, I think, just about across every single department, and it's not just limited to our nurses either. If you look at our diagnostic imaging areas, we're recruiting in there. All of our support areas. I think most people are aware of the nationwide workforce shortage, and healthcare is not immune to that at all. We have significant shortages in RNs, and I think it just speaks to how much our team that is here is doing and working. They are doing all they can to ensure that our quality of care remains top notch, and they're doing a fantastic job of that. We fully recognize, though, there's a runway on that. People can only work at that clip for a defined period of time before that resilience starts to wane. We have auxiliary staff that we can bring in the form of like a traveler or agency nurse to help fill in some of that gap. But because this is a nationwide issue, the competition for those resources is extremely high. And so we've seen things that have historically been very successful, like sign-on bonuses or crisis rates of pay to try to get folks here, just not working as well as they have in the past. So we're basically trying to employ every strategy we know that works and try to get innovative to understand what are the levers we can pull that can recruit more people to Providence Newberg, while still making sure that the needs throughout the entire region are met. Dr. Johnson, is there anything else we can do?
No, I mean, it's as Joe mentioned, it's really a kind of an unfortunate situation to where there is just such a high demand, and the pandemic has caused so much kind of just in general strain on the healthcare system that yeah, there's definitely people are kind of experiencing burnout. I know as providers, just with how things have been kind of getting busier and busier recently, we're in discussions with actually adding an additional physician for coverage at kind of peak times of the day, simply just to kind of deal with what's going on. So it's been challenging to pivot, but I know we're trying as hard as we can. And as Joe mentioned, we're doing kind of our best, and it's just it's a hard time to be in healthcare. I would never have predicted this, 2 years ago at all. I mean, it's remarkable how things have kind of progressed.
I was in your emergency department last year at the height of the pandemic, and I was understandably a little anxious about my health while I was there. And gosh, the staff was outstanding. They were so careful. They had all of these protocols that they were following to make sure that I was protected. And I just wonder, now that the pandemic is winding down, at least temporarily, are those protocols still in effect, the same ones?
Yeah, and they are. Our goal is to never have a COVID exposure to where, we would, get a patient kind of ill with COVID. So we are all still masking, even though our staff is fully vaccinated. And we're using face shields. We're being aggressive with hand hygiene. We have negative pressure in our rooms, many of our rooms. So if anybody that comes in with kind of COVID-like concerns, sore throat, shortness of breath, that sort of thing, they're placed in a room to where air is essentially being pulled into the room and then exhausted out of the hospital. So really to minimize any chance of sort of spread through an aerosol means within the department. So we really try as much as we can to minimize any potential kind of exposures. And unfortunately, that does still lend us to being a little bit more restrictive than we have in the past with regards to visitor policies. And again, the goal is not to, punish anybody or to make anything challenging. We just want to make sure that, our community stays safe. Of course, if you have a little kid and, they're having something going on with them, their parent is 100% allowed to come back. And similarly, if somebody has like significant, dementia, for example, and an elderly individual, the family or caregiver can be allowed to come back, because that will, not only help us, but also, kind of help keep the patient comfortable. But yeah, we are still pretty aggressive with our COVID protocols, simply because we just, I do not want to see this pandemic rear its ugly head any more than it already has.
It was interesting on my visit. One of the nurses, I think, detected my anxiety, and she said, you're probably safer here than you would be in the grocery store.
I think you're 100% correct with that one. We are super diligent. And so, yes, that's a fair statement, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Some emergency departments, the staff have been dealing with a different kind of patient come in that's angry, even hostile or violent. And sometimes in some places, they've been armed. Have you had any incidents like that here? And if so, how are you helping the staff deal with those traumas?
Yeah, unfortunately, and again, speaking to some of earlier, the mental health stresses that the pandemic has kind of engendered on our country and the world, we have had an increase here in Newberg, people that are just kind of upset. And it's not that they're necessarily upset with our care, because they're kind of coming in just upset. They're coming in angry. And again, sometimes drugs and drug abuse is played, into that as well, or alcohol abuse. And so it's challenging. I mean, we've definitely, as a provider, I have been sworn at, threatened, physically assaulted. And it's just, it's an really unfortunate part of healthcare. But it's something that, we have, Providence actually provides a great resource for our medical staff to kind of have, free counseling about some of these issues. If there are really significant traumas, we have our spiritual care staff has arranged in the past debrief sessions. And so we really try to, kind of maintain our mental health, because, if us as providers are not, if we're not mentally healthy, we're not going to be doing as good of a job. And so that is something that as a department, we strive to go for. And I'm also a big proponent with my physicians that, when you get some time off, you should take that time off, spend time with your family, do things you enjoy. I just got back from a recent short stint in Central Oregon, where I fished and kayaked and hiked and just really was able to sort of recharge the batteries. So I think that's important for everybody. And I try to stress that with our docs as much as possible, because it's a challenging job, emergency medicine. And it's something that I think we need to be refreshed each time. Otherwise it can be hard.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Dr. Johnson, favorite kayak spot?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So each time we go to Central Oregon, we try to get to one of the new Cascade Lakes. And, most recently we went to Sparks Lake up there, and it was great because it's a crazy shallow lake. I mean, I don't think there was a single part of that lake to where I could not stand up. But in a kayak, it was super easy to navigate, but beautiful, kind of scenery of the mountains. I was quiet. We actually saw an osprey like dive down maybe 50 yards away and snag a fish. So right now that is topping my list. So I really enjoyed that one.
Shallow and great for the kids. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah, we definitely all need that kind of thing. Has Providence Newberg presented any challenges that were unexpected coming here?
I think for me personally, the biggest challenge has been the amazing growth that has happened in our area. I mean, yeah, anyone that has driven between, Newberg, Sherwood, and then, Beaverton. I mean, the Progress Ridge area is developing, Dundee, all of these areas are just expanding. I mean, you just look across the street from our hospital and there's a ton of construction. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is just how quickly our community has grown and trying to kind of step up and meet that need. When I first started here 5 years ago, the number of patients per day that we were seeing was significantly lower than now. And just the general acuity and kind of the level of kind of illness has been different. We would get sick patients in the past, but now we're just getting a lot of patients that are really, medically complex that oftentimes will receive a lot of care at like a tertiary care center like St. Vincent's or Prov Portland or OHSU or Randall Children's Hospital. And it's we're seeing a lot of those kind of come here. And so kind of managing that and being able to sort of stabilize that individual and then get them to like a higher level of care. We've been doing that more and more, and it's challenging. It makes my job exceptionally interesting, stressful at times, but interesting. But so that I would say that's probably one of the biggest surprises is just that with the recent growth, how fast things have changed, and trying to kind of keep up with that pace of growth is it'll be interesting to see 3-4 years from now how things are different.
I see Nicole.
All right, that means it's time for some audience Q&A. So we did get a couple of questions here today from the audience. The first question was, how are you able to protect patient privacy when you are taking blood or doing other care in the waiting room, like you mentioned earlier?
That is an excellent question. And we actually have set up things so we're not, all of those types of activities will be done in a triage room. So if you were to come to the emergency department, we have our registration desk, which is just a few feet inside the main door. And then on 2 adjoining sides of that, we have a triage room that is fully enclosed, where you can definitely have privacy, and blood work and that sort of thing would be done in that room. And then after that was done, if there was no space in the main ED, we would have you then exit the triage room and go ahead and wait in the lobby until a bed was available. And for example, other things like an EKG or that sort of thing, to where we would need to place like electrodes, little stickers on your chest. Obviously, you'd want to make sure that that was done in an appropriate setting. And so we have a couple of rooms that we use that are in the back in the ED that are dedicated, that are completely private. So that way we can maintain patient privacy, because that is absolutely something that we kind of hold in the highest regard and really want to maintain. But excellent question.
Our next question is, are you concerned about the number of boarders versus open patient rooms available for patients? Do you see any safety issues with patients that need to wait, such as ones with chest pain complaints?
Yes, that is it is something I worry about on a daily basis. It is always challenging, and unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where sometimes just to speed up somebody's care, we'll actually have to have a hospital bed in the hallway of the ED, which again, kind of speaking to the privacy issue, is never ideal. But when when we weigh kind of the concerns for privacy versus the concerns for making sure that we can initiate a workup. Again, with patient's permission, we will kind of get that workup going. And so it is something though that absolutely medical boarding is a challenge that is again not unique to our hospital. In fact, for the longest time we've been completely insulated from it, and it's been more of a national issue. But more recently we've unfortunately kind of joined that group. But it is something that we try to triage levels of acuity. And so that's something to where, as I discussed earlier, sometimes if you come in with like a finger laceration, a little cut on your finger, or like some type of orthopedic injury, you may unfortunately have to wait in the lobby for an extended period of time if there is such a high level of kind of acuity in terms of ill patients that are back in the ED proper. So it's a challenge. It's something that we continue to try to figure out the best way to manage. But it is something that is absolutely on everybody's kind of the forefront of our minds to try to make sure that we keep everyone safe.
Oh, I think you're muted, Nicole.
Thanks, Joe. This question just popped up, and I think it would be a great one for you to answer, Joe. What are the plans for expanding the hospital size?
Yeah, that is a great question. Well, there's a couple things to consider when we think about hospital expansion. One is to remember that we live in a state where hospital beds are regulated. So even if I wanted to wanted and had the money to build, 10 or 20 more beds onto the hospital, I can't do so without state approval. And that approval process is a very rigorous effort to justify the demand. And rightfully so. Our state wants to be good stewards of healthcare dollars and not inadvertently overbuild and not match capacity and demand. That's great in an environment where we don't have a surge of volume, but we're in a state right now where volume is exceeding what our capacity is. And so we are trying to look at the data and understand if we can forecast out what our bed demand analysis will be. So that's another sort of rigorous process where we're going to use population metrics and do an analysis for what are our needs going to be in 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years down the road, and try to prepare for that future in a real planful way. And then use the certificate of need process, which is what is regulating our capacity in the state, to understand how we can fit the bed needs within that. I can tell you that that is a lengthy process. There's nothing we can do within 6 months timeframe to really just bolt on beds to the hospital. So we're gonna have to get really creative about how we efficiently use the ones we have, while in a parallel state plan for how we're going to expand in the future. But it is our intent to grow with the community and ensure that we are here to serve the community of Newberg and Yamhill County into the future.
Great, thanks, Joe. All right, I think we have time for one last question. And this question is, do you have plans on how to retain the experienced staff that you already have?
I can jump in there if you're okay with that, Dr. Johnson.
Sure.
Yeah, the retention component is something that I missed touching on earlier when we talked about the recruitment challenge that we face. Attempting to retain our experienced staff is a top priority that we have. It's difficult to balance that with how do you exactly find the real hook that's going to keep folks here. We believe that people are here working at Providence, both because they love the work they do and they love to care for patients, but they're here also to serve the mission of Providence, which we're all very passionate about. And so we're trying all strategies to ensure that we create a good work environment for folks so that they can come in here and have a consistent experience every day. That is challenged right away when you think about coming into an environment where you potentially are short-staffed and don't have the team that you're used to having around you to support. So we feel like the recruitment of new folks here will improve the overall experience for our caregivers, so they do have that team environment that they've been used to for so many years. And so that's one strategy. The other is just trying to have fun while we're here. So we had a couple weeks ago where we were serving snow cones to folks. We had a truck outside doing the same when we had some hot weather earlier. We celebrated Hospital Week in a big way. We've been giving away parking spots and car details to folks, just doing everything we can to try to lighten the mood and let people have some fun while they're here, understanding that we're still in a sacred environment and trying to be here to care for patients. But if folks out there, I'm speaking to our caregivers and community, if you have ideas for ways that we can improve around here, we are all ears and want to hear it.
Nicole, I had one more question for Dr. Johnson. We understand now that the new variant is in Oregon, and it is more virulent than the previous one. Are we ready for another pandemic should it come? Do you need more equipment? Obviously, you mentioned we'll need more staff, but are we prepared?
Yeah, and I do think we are, especially with the Delta variant. It has been fairly definitively demonstrated that it is, more transmissible The biggest like sort of tool we have in our armament is vaccination. I would absolutely encourage everyone, if you have not been vaccinated, please strongly consider it. It is something that they have done. There's been great evidence to show that people that do come down with kind of a breakthrough COVID case, even post-vaccination, if with the Delta variant, they really don't get that sick. Oftentimes it's asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic. Whereas, obviously, as we know, with COVID, there's a broad range of symptoms, but we're really not seeing that severe COVID that we, saw in the past in vaccinated individuals. So I'm just going to put a plug out there. Please consider vaccination if you have not already. There is, ample availability of the vaccines, unlike kind of back in March and April. So definitely do that. In terms of, with the increase, volumes, and, if we do see, unfortunately, like a big bump in COVID cases, similar to what's being experienced in like Arkansas, for example, that's something that I think we will approach similar to how we have before. We do have, ample PPE, our protective equipment, our supplies, our stocks are great. So I think we're good there. And I think a lot of the concerns that kind of early on in the pandemic, we've been able to sort of sort through some of those supply chain issues. So I'm optimistic that, in the sort of really horrible case that if things were to escalate, I do feel like we'd be able to meet that challenge now, more so than, let's say, a year and a half ago or year and 5 months ago.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for joining us today. Mike, Joe, thank you for hosting this. At this time, I'm going to welcome back Doug Kane, the Executive Director for Providence Newberg Health Foundation.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for joining us today. And a big thank you to Dr. Tom Johnson for sharing his valuable insight with us as well. As a reminder, our next Mondays with Mike and Joe is scheduled for Monday, October 18th at 12 noon. We will be joined by oncologists, Dr. Janelle Utzi and Dr. Kelly Perlowitz of the Providence Cancer Institute at the Providence Newberg Medical Center. They will be chatting with Mike and Joe about our expanded cancer center that opened in our new medical plaza earlier last year. You will enjoy hearing from them. And on Friday, August 20th at 6 p.m., please join us for our 21st annual Hearts of Gold virtual gala, a warm welcome presented by ADEC. Our virtual gala promises to be a bundle of joy as we will be raising funds for our birth center. Funds raised will help us purchase new panda warmers. These radiant heat units keep babies safe and warm immediately after birth as they are assessed and weighed by the medical team. We hope you can join us online, and with your help, we can give a warm welcome to each baby born at the birth center. If you would like more information regarding the Providence Newberg Health Foundation and ways you can provide assistance for our patients, visit our website at providencefoundations.org/Newberg. That's providencefoundations.org/Newberg. You can also call or email me. On the screen is my contact information. Also, if you have any other questions for Mike and Joe, let me know as well. If you submitted a question that was not answered during the program, we will follow up via email. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to you joining us again on Monday, October 18th.